Hello, good evening, and welcome everybody to this special, very, very special episode of Advocacy. In case you're new here and you're wondering why we call it Funvacacy, that's because this is advocacy with a little bit of fun. Well, today is World Vape Day, and our Twitter army has been doing amazingly well. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you who have tweeted your guts out. A special, special thanks to you. We are trending at number 4 right now, and the night is not yet over, and there's a little gap for us to reach number 1, and so I'm counting on all of you as you're watching this Funvacacy episode to continue tweeting till we are number 1. We have an amazing lineup of panelists today for this really special segment, and we have divided into 3 bits. One is with Professor Rajeev Gowda, former Rajya Sabha member, who battled heroically for the regulation of vapes during the debate. Also joining us from New York is Dr. Charles Gardner, who's been driving consumer advocacy from the front, and he is currently the CEO of INNCO, where our co-host Samrat is the president. For the second segment, we have H, as we popularly call him, a famous consumer advocate from the Asia-Pacific regions, and he has been mentoring a lot of consumer advocacy groups in the region. And along with him is our very own favorite Pingal Khan, who's our advocate and counsel for everything legal that we have doubts for. The last segment, of course, we have Dr. Kiran, who is a surgeon, a doctor, a vapor, and brilliant with words. Also with him is Cary Edwards, who is an entertainer, VJ, a comedian. I still need to learn things from him. And last but not the least, Lavanya Lakshminarayan, who is an author, novelist. Her best-selling novel is Virtual Reality. And to steal a little of her limelight, she happens to be my niece. Well, this is an interactive event, and I would encourage all of you to please keep posting your questions to the panel audience in the chat session on YouTube, and we will try our best to answer all of them. I know, sorry, Arun. He's whispering in my ear, telling me that it's time to move on. So without much further ado, I'm going to get the show on the road. Professor Gowda, my first thing to you. You're an academician, a Fordham graduate, and if that is not enough, a Wharton PhD, and then postdoctoral work at Berkeley. Social sciences and public policy is your niche area. IIM Bangalore was lucky to have you for a little while, but then you took a plunge into politics. And are we glad that you made to have you here? And my first question to you. I have to thank you right off the bat that on behalf of AVI and all the vapers in India for having taken such a balanced view on e-cigarettes. regulation during that debate in the parliament. Our hearts and minds really lit up because we were really depressed watching the quality of debate that was going on. And we really thank you for all your support. My first question would be, what was your rationale, Professor Gowda, in supporting the call for regulation vis-a-vis the trend that was there to go for an all-out ban? Please.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And it's an unexpected pleasure because I did not know about a vaping community or, for that matter, World Vape Day. And so it's nice to be here. See, my speech was focused entirely on what I would call public policy analysis. It's a subject that I've taught, and the field of risk regulation is something that I've published some research on over the years. And basically, the thrust of it all is that we may not have perfect solutions, but we need to have solutions that are feasible and practical. And a ban of any kind is always, sort of an extreme measure. And we should actively explore alternatives to see whether something else would be more appropriate in order to achieve whatever policy goal we're trying to achieve. And here, what shall we say? The aim would have been to, reduce harm in society, reduce harm to people who are consuming tobacco, either through smoking or chewing, and to see whether these, ends, as they call, could actually be a much more safer alternative. Now, basically, what I was looking at were risk trade-offs, right? Prohibition, of liquor, which has been tried in many jurisdictions, often results in an underground economy and the rise of criminals and mafias and things like that. So that's something that we all know about. That you ban something, you create an underground economy for it, which is unnecessary. And so I was essentially articulating a fairly reasoned, exposition, saying, look, you don't need to do this. You can actually, bring in these alternatives in a more regulated manner, in a way that, possibly makes these accessible, if you want to be restrictive, only on the basis of a doctor's prescription or something like that. Okay, so that way it could be available only in pharmacies rather than sold everywhere. And of course, that could lead to a certain amount of leakage, but overall, it's still entirely doable. After all, a lot of regulated drugs are only, distributed in that particular manner. And, so what shall we say? I know how difficult it is to give up smoking. And, if nicotine hits can be enjoyed without, the equivalent potential harm that smoke inhalation, can cause, then it's certainly an option that's worth exploring. And that's what I was urging the minister, and the government to do, to basically think, take a step back, think about, the overall health cost reduction that we would see if more people had an alternative to, still engage with nicotine while not engaging with smoke and tar and all the other harmful substances that are consumed when you actually smoke a cigarette or something like that. Yeah.
It's incredible because it's almost like we are listening to each other speak. It's like when Samrat and I have a conversation, or the board of AVI has a conversation, or when we are talking amongst ourselves. This is almost exactly what we talk of. We're not saying have it free. We're saying regulate. Get logic into your decisions. Hey, Charles, you're a PhD in neurobiology.
So if, one second, I may just.
Yeah, please.
No. So I just want to complete that. So the government, the minister took up this argument that children will get addicted to this stuff, right? And that they had raided some school and found these devices in children's school bags. And I pointed out that children like to experiment. If you don't find these devices, you'll find cigarette packets. Okay. So where are we going with all this? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's all.
No, that's so true. In fact, we were also questioning the logic because it was just a blanket statement made by the minister. There was no evidence of it. Nothing has been put out in the media to say which school, what student, nothing. And so it just seemed to be playing to the gallery, at least for us. And we are biased viewers, I admit. So we obviously saw far more to it than what a rational, normal person might have seen. Thank you so much, Professor Gowda. Charles, coming to you. Well, you're a neurobiologist from the University of Michigan and a long-standing career in promoting research-based systems into improving health and now working towards tobacco cessation. And you have recently taken on the mantle of the CEO of INNCO and driving its efforts forward. My question to you now: whose position, the WHO and its position on e-cigarettes, continues to be divorced from reality? There is no science that seems to be employed in here, and it's openly partisan, and it continues to drive a colonial mindset. What can we really do to change that? And what about these Bloomberg groups who have been using who as a cover to push their agenda? What can we do?
Well, so I think this is one of the key questions. And I have to tell you, I come from a field where I focused for 25 years on HIV and TB and malaria and dengue and nutrition and children's health. And so I've come into this field only in the last 3 years. But so it's been a learning process for me. And one of the groups from which I have learned the most is people in the drug harm reduction field, from some of the luminaries in that. And they've been fighting a battle against the war on drugs and the criminalization of drugs for 30 years. And I have come to the conclusion that we are in the field of tobacco harm reduction about where they were 30 years ago in the field of drug harm reduction. One of them even told me, your problem is that nicotine just isn't harmful enough, which is a bit of a head-scratching statement. But what they achieved over many years to develop harm reduction programs for people who use much more harmful drugs than nicotine was achieved step by step and over a long period of time by getting public opinion to change, by getting journalists to listen, and then eventually getting policymakers, lawmakers to listen to the evidence, because the evidence was there 30 years ago. The evidence doesn't matter. Opinion matters more than evidence, unfortunately. And here in this case, since you raised the question about the World Health Organization specifically, there's an interesting lesson, because 30 years ago, the World Health Organization took a strong prohibitionist position against illicit drugs. And they held that position for a long time in the face of overwhelming evidence that there were harm reduction interventions like methadone, safe needle exchange programs, safe injection sites. They held that position until some other parts of the United Nations that focused on human rights, justice, and law began pointing out to the World Health Organization that many countries around the world were taking their advice and executing people who use drugs. Now, in my opinion, that's a violation of human rights. And so even people in the World Health Organization could see that. And they took a step back. And so I have to say now, the tobacco control field appears to me to be the only field that is rejecting harm reduction in the entire field of global health. This is a very odd thing, and we need to ask, some questions about why that is the case. But I can tell you that the World Health Organization and the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control Secretariat have very explicit documents in which they assume that all mention of harm reduction in the field of tobacco control is an example of industry influence. And I think that's at the crux of it, what's really happening here. So anyone who says, there's a continuum of risks in nicotine products, from nicotine patches and nicotine gum on one side, all the way up to combustible cigarettes and biddies on the other side. And obviously these have very different risks. And there are many products in between. With the exception of, nicotine patches and nicotine gum, which are lovingly blessed by the big pharmaceutical industry and lovingly approved by our regulators, the rest of them are all questionable because they have a taint of tobacco industry or nicotine itself.
Right, I agree, because nicotine is not the enemy, and despite what everybody says, that's the truth. But we seem to pretend that it isn't the case, and that's what the real problem is. Professor Gowda, following up on what I just asked, yeah, right. It is a key problem indeed. I completely agree with you.
Surveys in the United States.
Right. I seem to be having a little bit of audio problem with Dr. Charles. Arun, can you just check back in and try to fix it? But in the meantime, I will move to Professor Gowda. Following up on what Charles was talking about, there is this thing like, this one such group like the union has been saying that vaping should be banned in LMICs, but not in the West. And as a lawmaker, do you really think what do you think of such proposals that create this disparity between the West and the East, almost driving this different type of colonialism into the mix and scheme of things?
Well, this doesn't make that much sense to me. It seems like humans are humans, and are all going to be affected by the same, by the same products in similar manner. So to say that in one jurisdiction, this is the appropriate solution while something else is appropriate somewhere else, doesn't make that much sense. And I do think that we have a lot to learn from those jurisdictions where a ban has not been brought in, right? Where studies have been conducted, and there's a judicious balance between harm reduction and the use of and get people off burn combustible products. So I think I don't think there's a reason to imagine that one group of people in one part of the world are so much more deserving of paternalism and patronizing sort of legislation like bans. We can make up our own minds. We are intelligent enough as well. And people are going to make that, should be given the freedom to make that choice between choosing something like a cigarette or a bidi, which is potentially much more harmful than END's device, which is at this stage in scientific knowledge is not proven to be of the same level of harm. So so this is a way of sort of winning people off in a voluntary manner, and so that's something that I think should be brought back to center stage, and and there's no need to think that one set of people are more deserving of patronizing and sort of paternalistic bans. Mm.
Right, because it's almost condescending, it's like all people are equal, but some
Yeah, yeah,
people are more equal than the others, that it seems very, very, very patronizing. Um,
yeah.
Another question to you. There is a absence of tobacco harm reduction in India, and apart from tokenism like raising taxes, warnings, or small little things that come up. Smoking is injurious to health. Every time an actor smokes up on screen, nothing really is getting done. What would take the government to adopt meaningful THR policy or a tobacco harm reduction policy?
So actually, I would disagree with you a little bit. See, when you think about laws that have been passed within India itself, see, globally, the change in tobacco regulation, sort of happened once secondhand smoke became more prominent. When it was no longer something that you did to yourself, but you were actually harming somebody else who was in your neighborhood, because of the externality associated with your pleasure. And so initially across the world, you started to see smoking in non-smoking areas, and then smoking banned in indoor spaces, and eventually, eventually you would see in sort of dating columns, non-smokers only, or something like that. Then you knew that society had changed attitudes about smoking. I mean, I'm being facetious here, but I'm pointing out that once the negative externality on somebody else became clear, that's when regulation also changed. Now in India, it's not as if we haven't done something about it, right? I mean, there is this trade for governments between the revenue that comes from taxes on tobacco and alcohol as well, where alcoholism is a side effect. And what shall we say? Here, if you think about it, in UPA 1, when Anbumani Ramdas was the health minister, they brought in a law which said smoking is banned in public places. Okay. Now, this, when I first came across it, I was like, this is going to be a hugely unimplementable law, especially in India, where lots of laws are very difficult to implement. Who's going to implement, some larger directive like this? But if you actually look at the changes that have taken place, most facilities, most restaurants, most places now are non-smoking. Most indoor facilities tend to, absolutely, it's not, it's, I would say it's a social norm not to smoke outdoors. And even smokers will go out to balconies and open areas. And so, in that sense, the overall damage, the harm caused by tobacco, not necessarily to the smoker, but to everyone around him or her, that has come down considerably because of this intervention. So in that sense, it's not as if there hasn't been some move in that direction. There has. Okay, unexpectedly so, unexpectedly effective intervention without much enforcement, frankly. But but for governments to give up, their addiction to tobacco revenues, that's vaping devices going to provide the alternative? No. So what so there's so basically there's got to be a lot more thinking done on that front. I don't think that governments are driven by revenue considerations alone. I think people do worry about health impacts and about the health burden. See, we are a young nation, and the burden from having more people suffer from cancer and other health-related diseases that come from cigarette smoking, smoke inhalation, will sort of come out, much later, maybe a generation away. Okay, but that's going to be a very significant impact on healthcare costs and infrastructure. And it's better to anticipate that now and to bring about harm reduction measures, including by allowing in a regulated manner ends devices to let people who are addicted to cigarettes and combustible tobacco products to giving them an opportunity to switch to possibly less harmful alternatives. And that's where that's where I come in terms of the regulatory agenda. Of course, I'll have to wait till my party comes to office and then and then basically try and bring about some change in Parliament. But that's it's going to take some time. Hmm?
Thank you. To be honest with you, the oldest fighter for tobacco harm reduction is our co-host Samrat, and he's been there when all of us were just very happy getting our vapes because we were able to get it, and then he was the one who was reaching out to all of us saying, "Hey, why don't you come and join the effort? Why don't you come and join? We need to regulate these things." Well, Samrat's remarkable. He's someone who's been in the press and the media for a very long time. He's taken up harm reduction in a very, very serious way. And he's not just one of the founders of AVI and a director of AVI, he's also the president of INNCO, where Charles is the CEO. So, Samrat, what are your thoughts out here, and where do you think we're going? We have two brilliant minds with us.
Well, first of all, I would like to really thank Professor Gowda for speaking up in Parliament in a tone which was sort of radically different from what we are hearing. There were some parliamentarians who referred to the fact that, yes, these products are less harmful, but they referred to these products in an argument that then why are you banning these and not everything else? Whereas Professor Gowda stood out, in my view, by saying that we need to regulate these products. There needs to be a regulatory framework. So thank you so much uh, for that, and thank you on behalf of all the vapers in the country. And it is something that is the level of debate we were expecting from our parliamentarians. But unfortunately, that's not what we got. What we got was if it is good, it must be bad, and that kind of logic. And it was not an informed debate in general, but you really stood out for us, and thank you for that. And I hope you will keep taking up this cause and keep taking it further because there are many lives at stake. There are 100 million smokers in this country. There are 200, almost 270 million tobacco users, and harm reduction. And, we are not providing them adequate quit support. These quit lines, for example, half of the people, A, don't have access to them. Second, they don't really work. We are not even providing pharmacological support. We are not providing subsidized NRTs or gums to our people so that at least they have something. On one hand, it is said very loud and clear that nicotine is more addictive than heroin. Are you going to ask any heroin user to quit on their own? But tobacco users are expected to quit on their own, and it's somehow thought that this is a choice they make. So if they decide not to smoke, then they will stop smoking. Willpower backed attempts don't work. They're just 5% success rate with those. So tobacco harm reduction is an important strategy, public health strategy, which can be used in India. And I hope more parliamentarians see it that way because that's how things will change. Because we can create a people's movement, but it is you people who will decide our fate in the end. So I hope we will have your support there. And we would also like an opportunity to come meet you in person and maybe share more data with you and equip you in your work as much as we can.
Thanks, Samrat. Thank you so much. But Professor Gowda, that's in a nutshell what it really is all about. Uh, for us, it seems it's to be an uphill battle, and you were like this champion, this beacon of light. That was that was out there in the storm, and
Well,
and, and your speech
yeah,
really
no, it
did
all
give us
sounds
hope.
very nice, but I was basic. No, I think science, rationality, all those have to be central to any kind of regulatory intervention, and that's all I was trying to do. So basically, in 2014, I had edited a book called India's Risks, which is broadly on health, environmental risks. Just same month I was elected to Parliament. Anyway, I'm not in Parliament anymore, so it's going to take some time before all these things can, for me to come back into the center of the debate.
Charles, I have one question for you. We've been talking about the influence of foreign philanthropic influence, which is close to meddling, that is happening across the world, but more acutely in developing nations. What is your view in that, and how do you think we can counter that influence as people who are facing the brunt of these prohibitionary, discriminatory policies? Because they're not proposing this in the West, they're just trying to push these ideas. And they happen to have a lot more influence in developing nations because they directly fund health programs, so they have a seat on the table. What are your views on this influence, and how do you think, or what do you think consumers or people can do to counter it?
Yeah, well, I'll note that in the Philippines, this kind of interference has been noted and has finally hit the press, hit the journalists, and some have taken notice. But this external, let's all just be honest. There is one U.S. billionaire who has an outsized influence in the tobacco control field, and he's a prohibitionist, and he rejects tobacco harm reduction, which is fine. I mean, if you take that position, that's fine. But if you take that position and you're investing more than 150 million US dollars a year, and a lot of that money is going to influence policy in 50 different low and middle income countries, then there's a problem. And so in this case, it's a challenge because those investments are very often hidden. I hate to say it, but some of the tactics are really the same tactics that were used by big tobacco companies 30 years ago to establish front groups, astroturf organizations that then lobby governments. And so it's kind of like they've taken a page from the big tobacco playbook, in my opinion. I think the challenge is to out them. The challenge is to point out where they are influencing government policy. And I have talked to so many people in India, and the response I always get is, hey, we're a sovereign nation, and we can make our own decisions, and we can regulate things, and we're not too competent to be able to do that. And so the issue is there is an organization called the Union, which has issued a report saying, here are 10 reasons why nicotine vapes or e-cigarettes or these novel, safer tobacco products should be banned in low and middle income countries. And it smacks, because they're funded by that philanthropist, it smacks of what some people are now calling philanthrocolonialism. And I've spent my entire career focused on working with researchers in low and middle income countries. And I know the capacity. And I spent 5 years in India and have visited research laboratories all over your wonderful country. And they're top notch, they're world class. So the idea that India can't regulate the safety of these novel products while leaving biddies and deadly cigarettes on the market everywhere is, I would find it offensive.
Professor Gowda, from the bottom of my heart on behalf of all the vapers in India, as well as you, Dr. Charles. And I would like to engage, AVI would like to engage with the two of you further. And yes, we would like to invite you back for a more comprehensive session in the upcoming Advocacy episode. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Professor Gowda.
well,
Thank you very much.
in our next session,
Pleasure meeting you all. All the best.
Thank
thank
you.
you, sir. In our next session, we have H, who is one of the foremost advocates in the Asia Pacific region and the founder of FactAsia. Along with him is, of course, Pingal Khan, lawyer, and one of our great resources with AVI. And co-hosting with me is Maneesh, who's another member of the board of AVI. And I look forward to all of you continuing with us in this conversation. But before we even get started, I hope all of you are tweeting and continuing to tweet. There is the sticker that's running down there. Yeah, you can see that one. I hope all of you are following that one and are tweeting. Our two hashtags are WVD21 and NVapeBan. Yeah. So thank you so much, all of you, and I'm continuing to look at you. Drive this. Let's get to be number one. Yeah. Thank you, H, and thank you, Pingal, for joining us on this session. This is the segment 2. Yeah, and H, my first question right off the bat to you, and I hope you're ready for that. Now, you've been fighting this long, hard battle to getting vapes legalized in the Asia Pacific region. You're the founder of FactAsia, besides being a mentor for many consumer advocacy groups in the region. How do you suppose we have this dubious distinction of having 2/3 of the world's smokers, and what led to such massive adoption of smoking in our region?
Money. Short answer. I think, okay, very quick history lesson. Philippines, founded on tobacco. India has a long history with tobacco. Government owns significant stakes in the entire tobacco chain. China, same banana. Thailand, same banana. Indonesia, they don't exactly own the tobacco industry, but they have a huge amount of revenue that comes in from it, as do all the countries. Okay, I mean, I think that pretty much covers that question, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess it does. Yeah. Yeah, Maneesh. Pingal. Okay. I know I ask you this almost every time we meet, right? And it happens so often. Vapers always ask us this one question: what do we do if we get caught with a vape in our hand? We have a ban, we have a flight ban. What should they do under such circumstances?
Right. Let us first start with what is banned and what is not banned. So, what is banned with regards to individual vapors is basically selling, manufacturing, dealing in distributing vape products. It could be the vaping machine, or it could be one of the fluids, one of the flavors. But there is actually no express ban on usage per se, at least not as of now. I mean, we will obviously have to also see that there is a proposed COTPA, which could make things very, very different. But as of right now, there is no ban on individual smoking, or vaping in India. But the other issue is that now there is a ban, and I call it a backdoor ban, on carrying vape products in flights. Why I call it a backdoor ban is because the law that has been used was actually meant to stop or prohibit carriage of things like fireworks or things that could be harmful for passengers or the flight itself, unsafe to the flight itself. So not sure how that law could be used or applied to banning carriage of vape, particularly since other battery operated products are allowed, like your cell phone. So that part has never been clarified by any court or by the lawmakers, and but therefore, if you do get caught carrying vape products while you're transiting into an airline, to an airport, you could get into trouble only to the extent that it would be confiscated. But there is, and I want to make it very clear that there is no ban on use of vape. However, and there are two elements that has to be kept in mind. One is that there is a belief among some vapers that they can vape in certain places where you couldn't smoke. And that is not something that will be liked or not frowned upon by lawmakers, purely because the lawmakers haven't yet made any distinctions about that. So if you are vaping in an area which is otherwise non-smoking, be ready to get into trouble. That's one. And second is that, what happens in many of these countries, because the lower ranks of the police forces are not very educated, that there is a tendency to be overzealous about enforcement of laws. For example, if you're smoking on the public road in a non-COVID time, that is, it would not actually be an offense. But you ask any constable on the street, they'll tell you it's an offense, which it is not. If you ask them under what law, they actually don't have an answer. Similarly, in this case, if you are vaping in an open space, then there is no reason why that should be stopped. But there is a possibility that a cop on the street will stop you and will try to harass you, ask for a fine, etc., etc. You just have to be firm and ask them under what law are they talking about arresting you, or talking about confiscating the device.
Thank you, Pingal. That was
and
most
they won't
insightful.
have an answer, and typically they'll realize it's not.
Thanks, Pingal. That was very insightful, and I hope people can save themselves from harassment using that. My question is to H. H, you have been in advocacy for such a long time. Have you seen changes happening, even small incremental changes?
Yeah.
So, like, there are about 10 million smokers and 1 million vapers. 100 million smokers and 10 million vapers in India. And we've had this miracle product taken away. So, can you give us some hope by describing the changes that you've seen over these years?
Okay. Well, obviously, it swings and roundabouts. I think looking at the positives first. When I first started looking around the landscape throughout the region, not only was there really no consumer advocacy on tobacco harm reduction, smokers' rights, vapors' rights, there was basically no consumer advocacy for anything at all. Now we see that in countries throughout the region, consumer advocacy has really taken grass roots. And what I always say about grass is you can cut us down, but grass always grows back, and it always grows back stronger. And that's what we've seen in India throughout the region. The consumer groups are really becoming far more effective. They've learned some hard lessons. And bear in mind that every consumer group is unfunded, is struggling to get its messages across in a very complicated environment. And essentially our message, which is based on truth, reason, facts, evidence, human rights, and the public health interest, essentially, is being countered by lies, misinformation, and what have you, by incredibly well-funded naysayers who have vested interests. And okay, we won't go into this unless you ask me. But the tide is turning. As has been mentioned many times, this isn't a race, this is a marathon, and it's for sure that some of us will be passing the torch on to others. But ultimately, when you look at everything else that we've ever been exposed to in the harm reduction field, and I'm going to say a couple of them, which we all know, seat belts. I remember clearly when it was mandated that all cars would have to have seat belts, and you would have to retrofit seat belts or whatever. And there was an uproar. I mean, we don't see, they'll kill you if you're in an accident. They'll strangle you. No, I'm not, I don't want to be buckled in. I won't feel safe. Blah, blah, blah. And this went on for a while, but common sense and science ruled out. And now I think most of us wouldn't think about sitting in a car without putting our seatbelts on, because we get it.
I get your point, because you see, a seatbelt is not about reducing accidents, right? It's about reducing harm to the driver. So we know, I understand that. Now I have a very interesting question from one of the audience, Kamal, who says, now we keep talking about this argument about why vapes are being pushed down by countries which have high revenue from tobacco. Now China is huge on tobacco as well, but they seem to be promoting vapes like nobody's business. What would be your response to something like that?
Who me?
Yeah, your response. Yeah.
China. Well, okay. Look, I mean, China historically, since day one, has supplied the vast majority of vape equipment, and it's currently still the largest manufacturer of it. But interestingly enough, the government doesn't actually own any of that. It's all private industry and private enterprise. So when you say they're pushing vape, that's news to me, because as far as I know, vaping's sort of illegal in China. Manufacture all you want and ship it out, but don't bring it here, because we have the CNTC, China National Tobacco Corporation, and we own all the tobacco. And we also produce most of the counterfeits and all the stuff that goes around in the market as well, because it's done by those factories and by others. So I don't think China is particularly interested in having vape for the same reasons that India doesn't want to have vape, right, because it hits the bottom line of the revenue from the taxes and the ownership of ITC, etc., etc. In China, they own all of it. I mean, 100% of it. But it's an interesting conundrum, because the private enterprises feel under a lot of pressure. But the pressure is also now coming from outside, as countries, sensible countries, are regulating and producing regulations and standards. Now, if you want to sell to those countries, well, you have to manufacture to those standards, and that's a good thing. I'm not quite sure if that answers your question, but China is the driving force behind vaping, but indirectly, and it's an interesting thing to consider, that it is the entrepreneurs in China who drove this, and it's the entrepreneurs throughout the rest of the world who've driven it, and it's all fundamentally because it's works. If it didn't work and people didn't want it, we wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion. And I just want to say,
how true.
I answered the first question quite short. I just want to say,
I'm going to circle back to you. I'll take you up on that when you said about talking about vested interest. But before that, I want to ask a question to Pingal. Pingal, we always talk about this Article 21, and I mean that ensures the citizens of our country the right to protection of life and personal liberty. But I wanted to know, is there a limitation to this? I mean, are there any other articles of the Constitution which the government has violated? The reason for my curiosity is that in the case of vape, we believe that our fundamental right has been violated. But are there any other places where the government has violated the citizens' fundamental right and it is okay?
Right. So let's go back to something more fundamentally at the heart of India's policy making with regards to be it marijuana, be it vape, be it various other products, where India has almost consistently been very dogmatic in its approach towards policy making. And the heart of the problem lies in our constitution itself, where under the directive principles of state policy, which in lay terms is the kind of policies the state should aspire to produce, we have actually said that the state should be allowed to prohibit in the name of public health. Now, what happens when we give a prohibitive power or in an objective clause, not in an empowering clause, in an objective clause, is we are essentially nudging the policymakers towards prohibition as the easiest, earliest, and first instance response to anything that is new. So until and unless they are certain that what they're dealing with is something they understand, what they can foresee, or it's something they're used to, their first tendency is to go with a ban, a prohibition, because they're allowed to do so. That's one. Second is, look, the problem with the Article 21 argument has therefore been married to the element of directive principles, saying that your liberty to choose or right to choose needs to be seen in the light of the state's obligation to take care of public health, which all goes back to the heart of the problem, that there is a significant amount of misinformation, and the side which is sharing the misinformation seem to have greater access to government, and that misinformation is believed to be science, while the other set of scientific studies are not believed to be science, or for whatever reason is not reaching out. So that is essentially the issue, and the fact that our own constitution kind of directs people to go and prohibit, which then becomes a very easy way out for any policy. Prohibition is easy. Legislation and regulation is difficult.
So if I summarize what you said, the state is within its rights when it prohibits if it is for public good. Now, what we have to prove is not that the state has done wrong, but that it is not in public good.
Absolutely. And what we have to convince the state is that there is something to gain out of legalizing vaping. And that cannot be through the root of the issue of whether tobacco industry is owned by Life Insurance Corporation of India. Because if you look at even the proposed amendments to the COTPA, which is the anti-tobacco statute in India, that is not just going to hurt vaping, it's going to hurt smoking industry massively. And it's going to hurt the smallest guy in the supply chain of cigarettes, the smallest roadside retailer. And that is the level of dogmatic short-sightedness that has driven our tobacco policy making all along. I mean, that is if there is something consistent about our public policy making, it's in its frailties, it's in its inconsistencies, and in its short-sightedness.
Thank you, Pingal. I think that answers my question. If now I would like to go back to H, and you said that you would only talk about the vested interests if I asked you. So, see, the philanthropies like Bloomberg, though they are probably well-intentioned in the broad sense of harm reduction, but they don't seem to appreciate that vapes have huge harm reduction potential. In this ignorance, the I know it all problem seems to be similar to something Trump suffered from, or is it something more nefarious?
To put yourself in the shoes of a billionaire is, of course, something that the rest of us just dream about. But perhaps when you're sitting there with all the money in the world at your disposal, and you feel that you need to justify the path that you've taken, that you genuinely are a good soul that wants to give back, whatever, though I think most of us that know people who know billionaires know that they're sort of, well, I mean, you know, even quasi fake billionaires like Donald Trump, you know, they tend to share a certain megalomania, and this is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to public health policy, particularly so when you throw hundreds of millions of dollars at scientific so-called communities, at NGOs who have very specific goals, and then you corrupt those goals to incorporate your own moralistic take on what people should do. I don't think there's anybody that really appreciates being told what to do at any level I mean, don't cross here. But don't make a lifestyle choice that can save your life, that can impact the public health of the country that you reside in positively. And this is what I wanted to say before. I used to smoke 30 cigarettes a day. When I switched to vaping, as pretty much, I guess, anybody that's listening here will know and understand, there was this like watershed. The light came. I don't need to smoke anymore, and I never smoked since. Had I smoked, I'd be dead now. Okay, and I continued smoking. I would not be here. You'd be just showing a picture of a coffin, because that's where I was going. That's where all smokers are going. 50% of them will die. To sit there in your ivory tower and dictate your erroneous moralistic will through throwing money and corrupting, because that is the word, the WHO, the WHO FCTC, the governments throughout this region and beyond, with your moralistic, imperialistic, chauvinistic, arrogant, blah, 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 way of going about things, is not only probably illegal in all the countries you're doing it in, and that would include India, the Union. I mean, hello, come on, yeah? You're taking money from an overseas NGO, a US NGO that has no permit to do that in the States, so you're breaking the law there. Let's look at Giuliani, right? And then you're using that to influence the policy of a sovereign government. That is, as far as I know, illegal in India. It's certainly illegal in Philippines, and it's coming to a boil there. It's illegal in Pakistan. It's already come to a boil there. It's illegal in Malaysia. It's coming to a boil there. It's illegal everywhere, and it is coming to the boil. So to go back to the very first question you asked me, yes, I do think that we will be seeing some changes coming up quite soon, because it's now become very, very evident that the money, and it is billions that have been plowed into this, encouraging corrupt science, fake news, all of this drivel, and cutting off the voices of you and me and the scientists, the independent researchers who've done the work and have actually put it there as here's the evidence, the actual real scientific peer-reviewed evidence, to just cut all that out because you've got the money. And as you mentioned earlier, Pingal, that there's just a few people the government are listening to. Look at who those people are and look at where their funding comes from. You don't really want me to carry on anymore, do you? I'll just
No, I don't, because I do want you to carry on, but today we have quite a few guests lined up and we are running short of time. Before we end this segment, I would like each of you to take maybe 30 seconds to answer one small question. What's your vape setup? And when you started vaping, how soon were you able to quit smoking? Pingal, would you like to go first?
Right. So I actually vaped for only 3 months, and I did that only when I needed an urge to smoke, and then I quit. And then I must say that I bounced back for a few days in the lowest point of lockdown last year, and I'm now again fine. I've been able to get back to no smoking, no vaping, no nothing situation. But there was a short phase when I actually did not have either vape or anything, and I actually went back to cigarettes in a very short phase, I think in June of last year or something. But yeah, so that was my distinct story. And I just want one moment of your time to say this, that when you say law and constitution, my request to anybody who reads the law is to say that, look, the law actually says that it will ensure and guarantee life with human dignity. We are discussing liberty and discussing life, but the crux of the problem is our inability to understand the importance of human dignity. What smoking does, what cigarette smoking does, it essentially strips you eventually of that human dignity, and not allowing a person that alternative to reduce that fate, to avoid that fate, is cruel, is unfair, and is unbecoming of a sovereign.
Absolutely, Pingal. And we will certainly talk about these topics in depth in a future episode. But today, let's stop there. And H, can you please answer that same question?
Okay. I discovered vaping in the illustrious presence of Dr. Frasalinos in Malaysia quite a few years ago when we were exploring the backwoods there. I bought several vape devices. I think the very first one I bought was in a W.H. Smith's on a trip to London. It was rubbish. But I could see the benefit of it. Actually, the very first vape I ever tried was not a tobacco vape. It was a Korean green tea vape. This is many, many years ago. It was actually quite nice. I could see how it worked, but it didn't replace cigarettes. That came about after I'd been vaping, trying it, giving it up, not really, until I found that one device and the flavors that worked for me. And in my case, it's a device I don't like fiddling around, changing coils and messing around with that stuff. Just plug and play. That's me. And there are plug and play devices out there which are brilliant. Not for everybody, because some people like the great big, and some people like the small things. And there's so much choice, and that's so great. And we need to have those choices because everybody's different. Everybody needs a different unit, a different juice, a different strength, and that's the joy of it. The flavors are what are so important, because it's going to be much, much harder to quit if the only flavors you can get are tobacco. That's the flavor you're trying to escape from. So that's how I did it, and thank God for vaping. Vape on.
Thank you both, Pingal and H. And Jaggi, over to you.
You've still been around with us, and thank you, Pingal, for coming and spending and sharing your invaluable wisdom as always with all our viewers. Well, gentlemen, once again, it's time for me to remind you, I hope you are tweeting. I hope you're continuing to tweet. This is our day, right? This is our time now, and we got to be tweeting, and we got to be trending #1 before the night is through. And so I'm really counting on all of you. Well, in this last segment, we have Dr. Kiran Melkote, who is our friend, fellow vapor, wordsmith, surgeon, who believes and who actually shows that his scalpel is as mighty as his pen, right? We have Cary Edwards, who is an entertainer extraordinaire and a lot of fun to chat up with. And of course, Lavanya Lakshminarayan, who is an author, best-selling author, if I may add. Right. I'm going to start off with my first question to you, Cary. How important do you think public perception of actors is to them personally? How do actors really feel about public perception? And is the use of tobacco prevalent in the entertainment industry?
Oh, when the cameras are not rolling, absolutely. I've been a part of the entertainment industry now for 20-something years. And most actors smoke when the cameras aren't rolling. That's a reality of life. I smoked for 20-something years, The only difference is because I was never a Bollywood superstar. I didn't have to hide it. But the truth of the matter is that smoking, like anything else, is something that a lot of people do. It's not bad people that smoke. It's people that smoke. And I think that that's something that we really need to get our heads around, because the reality is that for the longest time, like, how do you know who the bad guy is in the movie? He's the guy smoking.
Do you
right?
tell her his mic is off?
You're going to have to excuse my puppy because she gets very excited when I'm online. And then she'll,
Yeah, but it's fine.
So-
It's fine.
So that's always been, so smoking has always sort of been like this trope within the entertainment industry where it was used to signify certain things, right? Who's the bad guy? The guy who's smoking. Who's the guy that's going to rape the girl? It's the guy that's smoking, right? And then you take that idea out onto the street. And so obviously only bad people smoke. But the reality is people smoke, right? And that's the thing. And like, so when we say things like, how is tobacco perceived in the acting community? It was perceived like it is in the fisherman community, and in the author community, and in the auto driver community. It's the same thing, because any community that's made up of people is going to perceive it largely the same way.
Thanks, Cary. Okay, that's interesting indeed. Doc, to you now. We have this constant barrage, right, of vaping being bad, and so many of the doctors appear to be so ill-informed, despite the overwhelming evidence on how much safer vaping is compared to smoking. What's the reason for this massive disconnect?
Well, what I would say is it's not just the doctors who are disconnected. If you look at the WHO, if you look at many of the well-respected organizations across the world, they seem to share this disconnect with reality. See, I think there's a lot of speculation among us why this is so. So it could be a case of vested interests. It could be a case of, people just don't want to accept the truth. There's a lot of feeling that, if it is so easy to give up smoking, it must be bad, right? So
yeah, I know.
A lot of doctors in India and across the world, they feel that nicotine is a carcinogen. I mean, that is the level of that is the magnitude of the problem we're dealing with. So such a basic thing that nicotine by itself is very addictive, yes, but not harmful per se. But that is the reason why somebody would pick up a cigarette. So the whole point of harm reduction, where you would transition them to a safer way of getting nicotine, which we know is not as harmful as, for example, caffeine. But still, because it's a part of cigarettes, it's been vilified left and right. So unfortunately, that mud has stuck, and it's quite difficult to shake that image. But I think we're getting there. So slowly there is a groundswell of opinion, and over the past few, I would say, months, so there are some changed minds among all those people who would oppose us at every step. I think there are some changed mindsets, and I'm very optimistic that this can be carried forward. Let's see how things go.
That's so heartwarming to hear that they're actually, because I agree. We smoke for the nicotine and we die because of the tar. And that's what it really is, right? Hey, Lavanya. Now, I'm sure as women you face many unique situations of being a vapor now, or when you were a smoker once. Can you share some of these examples? Are they really different when you were a smoker and a vapor, or are things just the same?
Things don't change very much, at least in terms of the way you are perceived by the general public. Because whether you are a woman standing on the road and smoking a cigarette or inhaling off a vape, there's still smoke coming out of your mouth, and most of society judges that, right? And like Casey said, it's regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. But specifically as someone who used to, occasionally step out of a workplace to get a smoke on the side of the street, I've been filmed smoking, standing on the side of the road by creeps, stuck at a red light. I'm usually stared at quite a bit when I go to a cigarette shop that isn't the local one where the guy behind the counter knows who I am. At least back in those days, they would, an entire crowd would just part and stare me down as I bought cigarettes. That definitely changes when it comes to vaping, right? Because you've got your little nicotine delivery system in your handbag. All you've got to do is discreetly charge it. A lot of the time you can vape indoors as long as you're not in a public place. And that makes a huge difference because you don't always have to step out into full public view and leave yourself open to all kinds of judgments coming from various parties who find you to be a bit of a novelty while you're vaping or smoking.
Right. Hey, thanks so much. Cary, coming back to you. Now, we keep hearing, right, from people that there are so many celebrities and entertainers and actors who have actually switched from smoking to vapes. And while I completely understand whether you want to advertise to the fact that you smoke or vape is a personal decision, can you think of any reason why we don't see too many celebrities stepping forward and standing up as a shining example to say, well, I vape and it's safe, or I use. Well, you have people who say, I have never smoked in my life. So you don't have that.
That's obviously when that's obviously
Right.
when
Yeah.
the
That's
best
what you see.
actors,
And
right?
we do have some parliamentarians who are former actors who do their best performances in Parliament as well. I mean, we've had some remarkable examples of them.
Yeah, and much like when they were actors, someone else is writing their lines
Exactly.
again.
But why do you think that they're so hesitant to come forward and talk about their personal life in this form? There seems to be holding back that. I mean, is it an image
Well,
you
I
need
think
to protect, or
so.
how's
So I
that?
think that fundamentally, I think it's very connected to the last question that we were talking about, right? Which is that because of all of the tropes that we've had in cinema and so on and so forth, there is a sense that smoking is bad, therefore vaping is bad, therefore anything associated with smoking, vaping, any of that, drinking, all of that is bad. But more than that, here in India, you see, we don't really think of our actors as actors, right? It's not a job that the person does, it's who the person is. So Shah Rukh Khan is essentially Shah Rukh Khan in every film. So largely, he's not really an actor. He's a guy who changes his name for work, if that makes any sense, right?
Okay.
And I don't mean this to be in any like offense to actors, but here in India, actors are treated like they're not human anymore, right? And I suppose that once you get to that level, when public perception is everything, you don't want to take any risks, because even the smallest risk can have everything go away suddenly, And I mean, that could just be one reason. But the good news is that the younger generation of actors don't seem to be like that. The younger generation of actors seem to be much more willing to go out, speak their mind about things that have nothing to do with acting, things that they're passionate about. So whether it be vaping or any other, social commentary, you start to see younger actors actually being willing to do that, which I think is a huge plus for the future.
Yeah, I do hope that somewhere in the near future we're going to have some other celebrity watching this and saying, maybe I should start talking about it, because that's the kind of moment we really need,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. It really is. In fact, I was watching a movie recently where you know how they started putting the cigarette smoking is injurious to health every time someone lights a cigarette on screen. Right? They start to put that thing in the little corner, and they did that, except the person was vaping, and I'm like, wait, no. If someone was starting a fire and someone was boiling water, those are not the same thing. Smoke and vapor are different. You cannot classify them the same way, and you cannot have the same warning. It's absurd. But then, of course, what do you expect from essentially a government that is anti-science? That's the only way that I can put it. A bureaucracy that is anti-science.
Yeah, I guess that kind of puts us in rather a spot, because we need a lot more to do before we can get them to change their mindsets there, right? But then taking that and taking it a
Indeed.
little
I
further.
mean, to begin with, we have to.
Yeah, you were saying something.
Sorry, you were saying. No, I
No.
was saying the first step to getting them to change their minds is to actually go out and teach them to read.
But then taking what you answered to Dr. Kiran there, right? Now, Kiran, though this pandemic, now it's been terrible for all of us out here, right? And that's when we ordinary citizens realize that the government actually does have the will and the ability to fast track studies research, even find cures. And considering that tobacco-related deaths in India are over 1 million every year, how do you think that we could work with the government adopting similar kind of strategies with THR? And you're also one of the driving forces of AHRER. How do you think that we could use this example to drive it there?
Yeah. So I am glad you asked me the question. So there are two aspects to that. So I'll just give you a bit of background about AHRER. AHRER stands for the Association for Harm Reduction, Education and Research. So this is a group of healthcare professionals. We are actually very, we want to bring about some movements in harm reduction in various aspects of public health, not just tobacco. Although at this point of time, the burden of tobacco is so high that will definitely merit the most attention. And unfortunately, we don't have many people talking about tobacco harm reduction. So that's one of the reasons we formed this organization, so that we can at least take it up. Now, when it comes to the most effective form of, if you actually look at THR, the most effective form is vaping, right? Unfortunately, the research on vaping in India is frozen. In the sense, we cannot do any research on vaping in India. This is a de facto ban by the government of India. So that actually has led us to explore other avenues, smokeless tobacco, for instance, snus. So snus is also a pretty good product. So we are looking at trying to introduce snus varieties, especially considering the fact that in our country, it's not all cigarettes. A lot of people are into Cary, Zebda, and so forth. Yeah. So here, in fact, we have a skewed pattern of tobacco use. We have about 100 million smokers, but we have a larger number of smokeless tobacco. So we need to bring those people. If you just look at the philosophy of THR itself, so snus is definitely a safer product when compared to Cary or Zarda, which are basically unrefined tobacco. In fact, nowadays there are many companies abroad who are actually selling non-tobacco sourced nicotine pouches, which are actually made from synthetic nicotine. So that is not even from tobacco. That is completely tobacco free. So we are looking at those products, and that may be a way forward for us to get into research. But until the ban on vaping is lifted, or at least until they allow us to do some research, we would not be able to really get any data for our country in terms of ENDS or e-cigarettes. So we are just relying on data from outside. We are relying on the numbers. And to be very frank, there are so many studies which are coming up now in respected journals, NCBI, BMJ. So they all tell us that, what we've known for a long time. They all tell us the same thing. Vaping is definitely safer than smoking. But like I said, there are some vested interests, or there may be some other motives, which is preventing the larger community from adopting this.
Right.
That's where we are.
Yeah. Because I think it's also time to recognize that the vaping industry has actually been a disruptor out there, right? I mean, we have smoked the cigarettes in only one way, and we smoked the cigarettes for the nicotine, right? We didn't really smoke it for anything else. And that remained unchanged for a good 400 odd years. And suddenly here comes a device that changes the way we are able to get our nicotine, which is far safer. And so the reaction seems to be to immediately reject something which is a technology disruptor.
And each time you have a conversation with them, they keep shifting the goalposts. So first it is, no, it's not safer. So when you show them the study saying it is safer, they say, no, then you also have these products and you have these dangerous compounds and heavy metals coming out. Then you show them that at the levels that normal vapors at the levels that normal vapors vape, you would not get these compounds. Then they shift the goalpost further and say, what about the children? So, it's like if it is about public health, you have the discussion about public health. If it is about children, we totally support the fact that children should not be vaping. Yes, we are totally on board with that. We are not saying we want everybody in the country to vape. No, it should be at least for the smokers.
No, that is so true. In fact, before the ban, all our vendors had this self-regulating policy wherein they were enforcing that they wouldn't sell to minors. And that's what they had. Now, with that being taken away, we have lost the regulation. there's nothing preventing a minor from picking up a vape from the black market, which is a serious problem. Which it's actually like the government scoring a self goal here, uh, which is very sad. But that's the kind of problem. But moving to you, Lavanya, how easy or difficult was it for you to switch to vaping from cigarettes?
Initially, fairly easy because vapes vapes just taste better. They're so much more convenient. Like I said, you can smoke them indoors. I travel a lot, and I never have to worry about being an inconvenient house guest or putting out people at social gatherings because I don't walk around smelling like an ashtray. Um, so that was a huge incentive for me. And vapes actually, well, vaping makes me feel a whole lot healthier. I feel my lungs feel a lot lighter when I'm vaping. So the switch was not that challenging. What made it really hard and continues to make it very difficult is this ban, where having to rely on on a black market and not being able to predict where my nicotine source or supply is going to come from is a huge challenge because, like everyone's been saying on this panel, we're all doing it for the nicotine. We're not interested in the tar and the chemicals and everything else. It's about getting that nicotine delivery on time so that you don't go through terrible withdrawal and you can keep functioning. And without that, continuing to vape or exclusively vape has become a massive challenge, especially every time we go into lockdown. It's really challenging. But prior to the ban, it was a fairly smooth switch.
Okay, and in this transition, how supportive was your family in this decision? And more important than all of this was, did your family know that you smoked?
Immediate family, yes.
Okay.
But not necessarily everyone in the extended family. And the immediate family were incredibly supportive when it came to switching over to vaping, because they just saw it as me having less tar in my lungs, which was already an improvement. So I think everyone around me was very supportive of, and vaping is an initial bit of an investment. It's not a very clearly defined technology. There's not too much easily accessible literature out there, but they were still very, encouraging of it.
Okay. Thanks so much, La. Thanks so much. Cary, you're back. You had gone for a little while. Do you vape on your sets, Cary, during your performance?
I do.
Or do you kind of sneak off and vape a bit and come running back?
Well, so usually, anytime that there's a performance, you spend a lot of time backstage. And so in the old days, I would have to leave the building, so usually find some sort of a, the fire exit, ironically, get out of the building, smoke and come back in. Whereas now I just have a little vape that I use now. I actually switched from one of those massive machines to a much smaller one now since my babies are going to be here in just a couple of days. I've made a concerted effort to actually cut down my vaping, just so that would be easier when the babies arrive. But yeah, I vape backstage, and for the most part, no one has ever really, come up to me and said, "Hey, you can't do that." So yeah, it's become quite convenient. Having said that, though, just kind of going back to one of the things that you were talking about with Lavanya, when you were talking about the black market, one of the biggest problems that this sort of ban has created is that it largely hasn't affected guys who have been vaping for 5 years. Because if you've been vaping for 5 years, okay, so I've been vaping for about 5 years, and that means that I know at least 400 people that vape. Yeah. And so being able to get my hands on things is not that difficult. The people that it has largely affected are all of those smokers who are dying to quit smoking. Pun intended. those are the ones that are suffering. It's the future vapers that are suffering, not the current vapers. The current vapers are like, yeah, okay, whatever. That's the problem.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Cary. I mean, it's been quite challenging because I have not been vaping for 5 years. And as someone who's a lot newer to the community, I just don't know as many vapers. As a woman, trying to find the right people to get your supplies from is a bit of an extra challenge. And I knew a lot of people who are really keen on vaping once they saw that I was doing it, smokers, that is. And they decided to make the switch to vaping just before the ban kicked in. And that effort just, it went nowhere because they had absolutely no way to access
in fact,
vaping. Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that's becoming frighteningly more common is people, younger people, right? This was back before we were in a lockdown where we were still allowed to go outside, and I would like I remember once I was vaping in my car at the traffic signal, and this guy in the car next to me, he kind of like went like that, so I put my window down, and he was like, "Hey, where do you get your stuff?" And I was like, "Why?" And he said, because I found a couple of places on Instagram, and I've lost a lot of money to scams. So, like, if you can just help me out. And those scams wouldn't exist if the ban didn't exist, right?
I totally.
And that's it's such a pain.
Yeah. I have been vaping since the last 4 years now. So I do a lot of my own stuff, in the sense I build my own rigs, I make my own juice. So it's not a major problem sourcing the ingredients. We know where to look. I mean, most of it's on Amazon except for the nicotine. So, that's the only barrier as of now. And even that, we know where to find it. So it's not such a big deal. But exactly like what you were saying, Cary, exactly like what you're saying, Lavanya, I had actually spoken to one of my friends, and he had ordered from AliExpress a whole, he ordered 25 coils and 2 tanks and everything. It came here, and then the ban started. So it was ridiculous because that guy was smoking like a chimney, and finally we had got him on vaping. And he's also a doctor, by the way. But that's how the ball rolls. Unluckily, he's gone back to smoking, although I have sent him a few nicotine pouches. Let's see how it goes. Yeah.
In fact, also, on the topic that Lavanya was talking about how ever since she started vaping, it makes you feel better, right? So ever since I turned 38, I've been doing like medical checkups every year, right? Because my partner is a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? She's a little overcautious when it comes to my health. So I'm 42 now, right? And the last test that I did was a couple of months ago. It was like January. No, it was January. And it was a different doctor because my doctor wasn't around. He was at some conference. And so I had a new doctor, and I gave him all of my reports, and he said, okay. And he looked at it and he said, okay, so, any history that you want to tell me about? And I said, well, yeah, I quit smoking like 5 years ago. I used to be a very heavy smoker before that. And he said, really? Does it show from your lung x-ray, you look like a non-smoker? And I was like, dude, I was smoking like 50 cigarettes a day for 20 years before I switched to a vape. And he just looked at me and said, how many cigarettes a day? And I was like, yeah, like 50 cigarettes a day. And he's like, and when did you switch to the vape? And I was like, 5 years ago. And he just looked at my x-ray and he went, best investment you ever made. So I was like, okay.
That is so true.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, Lavanya, Cary, and Kiran, thank you. But I guess we have just run out of time out here. And thank you for being patient and coming and joining us and sharing some incredible experiences. Cary, all the very best and congratulations in advance.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
having
Thank you.
twins, right? Kiran,
Yep,
stay
yep.
safe. Yeah. Lavanya, thank you again.
Thank you.
Well,
Happy
this-
Vape Day
Happy
to
Vape
all of you,
Yeah.
and to
Yes,
everyone
indeed.
watching as well.
Yes, indeed.
I should say
And
Happy Vape Day.
Happy Vape Day. Yeah.
absolutely. And yeah.
Yeah,
Lavanya, you can wish
happy
to,
Vape Day, everyone.
Okay. Well, with that, I guess this is a wrap of the show. Well, it's a World Vape Day, and it's wonderful that we have all been here. Twitter is still active. We still have a few hours to go before it's midnight, and so I'm really looking forward to all of you getting onto Twitter now and tweeting your hearts out. We gotta be number one. We gotta tell the world out there that vaping saves lives. We need to end this vape ban. So we have this hashtag called End Vape Ban. We have WVD21, which is the World Vape Day 21, which is the official hashtag for the world of vapers. And we in India need to come together with the 60 million vapers out there who have been hammering away as we celebrate our freedom from tobacco. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you all on the other side.